Okay, let's really get into this. Picture a military target, right?
Mm.
One so heavily defended, so vital to the enemy, that hitting it seems, well, just impossible for a guerrilla force.
Completely out of the question, you'd think.
Exactly. But then imagine that force doesn't just hit it, they absolutely devastate it. We're talking 33 aircraft destroyed, fuel depots up in flames,
All gone.
and the whole thing done in just 18 minutes. It sounds like pure Hollywood, but the source document we're diving into today confirms this actually happened.
It's an incredible story.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, the EPLF, and their incredibly audacious strike on the Asmara Air Base back in May 1984.
An operation that got nicknamed the 18-minute wonder.
And for good reason, as we'll see. We're focusing specifically on one source document today, a really detailed account that lays out the planning, the sheer guts, and the clinical execution behind this almost unbelievable event.
And you really can't grasp the scale of what they attempted without understanding the context, you know? This was deep in the Eritrean conflict.
A brutal time.
Absolutely. The Dergue regime in Ethiopia was using its military might, especially its air force, to dominate. And the Asmara Air Base, I mean, it wasn't just an airfield.
No, it was more than that.
It was the symbol, the key instrument of their power in Eritrea. It housed their MiGs, their big Antonov bombers, the helicopters, everything they needed to control the skies.
The assets that gave them that critical edge.
For years, yeah, that air superiority was their trump card. So attacking that base inside its defenses, that was a challenge few would even seriously consider. It looked like suicide on paper.
Right, and that's why this source is so fascinating. It tells us how they made the impossible happen. So our mission today, using this account, is to unpack how this military miracle, as the source puts it, actually unfolded.
How did it start? What hurdles did they face?
Exactly. What details mattered? What can we learn from this specific account about strategy, courage, and fighting against overwhelming odds? How did this become such a legendary operation? Let's step through the narrative from this one source.
Sounds good. Where do we begin? The target itself.
Yeah, let's set the stage. According to the source, the Asmara Air Force Base wasn't just guarded, it was one of the most heavily guarded installations in the entire region.
Which implies serious security, layers of it.
Multiple perimeters, guard towers, constant patrols, tight access control, the works. And inside that fortress, the source lists the core assets. The MiGs, the Antonov transport and bombers, helicopters, and crucially, those huge, vulnerable fuel depots.
The fuel being almost as important as the planes themselves.
Absolutely. It was the absolute nerve center for the Dergue's air operations in Eritrea.
And the source makes it really clear this wasn't just a target they stumbled upon. Hitting it was a strategic necessity for the EPLF.
Why so critical?
Well, for years, the Dergue's Air Force had bombed EPLF positions, hit supply lines, caused civilian casualties, pretty much unchallenged from the air.
Because the EPLF had no real counter in the air.
Exactly. Those planes based in Asmara were that dominance. So taking them out, even with the immense risk, could fundamentally change the game. It could neutralize the enemy's biggest advantage.
A massive potential payoff.
Huge. But the challenge wasn't just lobbing a few shells at it. It was getting inside and hitting hard enough to make a real difference against that aerial might.
Okay, so how does a liberation front with no air force, no heavy artillery for a direct assault? How do you even begin to tackle something like that?
The source is emphatic on this.
Yeah.
It wasn't impulsive. It started quietly. Very quietly.
Preparation.
Meticulous preparation. The source stresses this wasn't days or weeks. It was months of planning and intelligence gathering beforehand.
Months just laying the groundwork.
That's what stands out in this count. It wasn't just about the final 18 minutes. It was built on this incredibly patient, long-term intelligence phase. Deeply proactive.
And the source highlights the people involved in that phase. It's quite something. It talks about EPLF fighters, the Tigadelti, working with extremely brave civilians right there in Asmara.
Living under the regime's thumb.
Right under their noses. These civilians were risking everything, capture, torture, death, to gather intel on the regime's prize asset.
It's extraordinary courage. And it wasn't just passing messages. The source mentions some civilians, or maybe fighters disguised as civilians, actually managed to infiltrate the Air Force Base itself.
Get inside. How?
The source doesn't detail exactly how, but think about what that means. Getting people inside one of the most secure facilities.
The kind of information you could get?
Exactly. Specifics you can't see from outside. Tarmac layout, guard patrol timings down to the minute, where specific planes were parked, line spots in the fence, shift changes.
Wow. That level of detail requires unbelievable bravery and skill.
And patience. Just blending in, observing, reporting back without raising suspicion. The source credits this insider access for the depth of their knowledge.
And how did they move this information? And weapons. The source paints a picture, doesn't it?
It does. Very clandestine. Whispers, secret meetings, hiding gear in the most ordinary places.
Like where?
The source specifically mentions hiding things under niledim, those traditional Eritrean woven beds or tucked away inside rooftops.
So using the fabric of everyday life for cover.
Precisely. It shows how deeply the military plan relied on the civilian network and the constant danger everyone was in.
An operation this complex needs strong leadership, right? Who does the source mention?
It places Commander Mehreteab Gebre, better known as Isaias, at the strategic center. But it also emphasizes the direct involvement of others like Ibrahim Afa and Sibhat Ephraim.
What was their role?
The source says they personally oversaw mission coordination. This wasn't just signing off on a plan. It suggests they were hands-on with the details, the logistics.
Which tells you how important this mission was.
Absolutely. Top leadership directly invested in this specific raid. It signals its huge strategic value to the EPLF.
And the planning wasn't just talk, was it? There's that detail about the sand model.
Yes. That's fascinating. In a remote hut near Allah, they built a scale model of the entire Asmara Air Force Base out of sand.
Why go to that trouble back then without fancy tech?
Visualization, rehearsal. A sand model gives you 3 dimensions. You see the terrain, the buildings, where the planes sit, the fences.
You can physically walk through the plan.
Exactly. Trace the infiltration routes, spot guard sight lines, understand distances, cover. They could rehearse entry, movement, escape over and over. Find flaws, opportunities.
It shows incredible meticulousness, taking nothing for granted.
And that carried over into the specific intel they tracked, which the source lists painstakingly.
Not just, there are planes.
No. Which types of aircraft, MiGs, Antonovs, helicopters, exactly where they parked, location of every guard post, patrol patterns and timings, fence heights, potential entry points they'd identified.
Knowing all that was the key, wasn't it?
It was the foundation. It let them assign specific commandos to specific targets, plot the stealthiest routes, time their moves perfectly. That deep knowledge countered the heavy security.
Even their clothes were part of the plan, according to the source.
Right, that detail about wearing jeans and those common plastic Asmara shoes under their camouflage.
Why?
Planning for the aftermath. If things went wrong or during the withdrawal, they needed to blend in, disappear into the city or surrounding areas quickly.
They could look like civilians if needed.
Exactly. Thinking steps ahead, planning for contingencies right down to their footwear.
Okay, so months of prep, intel gathered, model rehearsed, the plan moves into action. The source says the journey started May 19th, 1984.
At night, yeah. The unit leaves Allah, and they're not driving up in trucks, they're trekking.
On foot?
Over hills, through ravines, covering miles just to get near a lot closer to Asmara.
Quite a contrast, a high-tech air base targeted by a unit marching overland.
It underscores the guerrilla nature of it, doesn't it? That physical trek was the start.
And who was making this trek? A big force.
Not at all. The source specifies 15 elite commandos, highly specialized, chosen for skill, endurance, nerve.
Just 15.
And the source adds that chilling line, 1 mission, no backup.
Wow. So no safety net.
None. Success, failure, survival, it all rested on those 15 individuals.
Yeah.
The trust, the pressure must have been immense from the very first step.
And even with all that planning, things can go wrong unexpectedly.
Mm-hmm.
The source includes a very human, almost bizarre moment.
Yes. Weediamar.
Tell us about that.
Well, they're on the move, deep focus, need to stay hidden, and one of the fighters, Weediamar, gets hit with severe stomach pains, needs to, relieve himself urgently.
In the middle of nowhere, trying to be ghosts.
Exactly. A basic human need suddenly becomes a potential mission compromise. What do?
What did they do?
They improvised brilliantly, according to the source. They couldn't stop, couldn't send him back, so they disguised him.
Disguised him. As what to?
As an old woman. Head wrap, shawl, coached him to limp, and had a female agent escort him into nearby fields under cover of darkness.
Did it work?
The source says, amazingly, yes, it worked. It sounds almost comical now, but it shows that blend of meticulous planning and needing to think incredibly fast on your feet when life throws you a curveball.
Incredible resourcefulness. But then, A much more serious problem cropped up as they got closer.
Yes, the rendezvous near Merhano Dam.
Their final scouts, Teki and Asmalash, were supposed to meet them there, right?
Right.
With the latest intel.
Crucial final confirmation, guidance to the entry point. And the source says, they just weren't there. They didn't show up.
Oh no, that's a huge red flag in an operation like this.
Massive. Your mind immediately goes to the worst possibilities. Captured, ambushed. Is the enemy waiting for us? Are the entry points blown?
That moment of silence must have been incredibly tense.
Agonizing, go forward blind, turn back after months of work.
And the decision.
According to the source, it fell to Commander Isaias, and his command was clear. We go forward.
Wow. Despite the missing scouts.
Despite the missing scouts, a huge call. It implies immense faith in the plan, maybe in contingencies, or just a steely calculation that the prize justified the risk. A real leadership moment.
Do they have a backup plan for guides?
Apparently so, or they improvised incredibly fast. The source says new guides were assigned immediately from their support network.
So the plan wasn't totally rigid. They could adapt.
Which shows resilience, doesn't it? Either in the planning or the leadership's ability to react. They didn't fold. They found another way.
Okay, so they press on, new guides. They're approaching the base itself now. What happens next, according to the source?
Around 8 p.m. on May 20th, the unit splits into 2 teams. Final positions taken just outside the wire, and then the target assignments.
Done with precision, the source says.
Brutal precision, not random destruction. Specific teams for specific targets. Fuel depots here, Antonovs and light bombers there, MiGs and helicopters for another group, tanks and arms depots for the last.
Every commando knew their exact job.
Within that 18-minute window.
And their weapons. What does the source mention?
RPGs, Kalashnikovs, and silenced pistols. A mix designed for the job.
How so?
RPGs for the big targets, planes, fuel tanks, serious destructive power, Kalashnikovs for defense, suppressing fire if needed, and the silenced pistols.
For stealth.
Suggests trying to take out sentries quietly at the infiltration point first, right? Keep the element of surprise as long as possible before the main event.
And where did they get in? The source mentions the Godov checkpoint area.
Yes, cutting through the barbed wire there. And the source paints this picture of contrast.
How do you mean?
The commandos are hyper-focused, moving stealthily with their weapons, but the base perimeter that Sunday evening, apparently quite relaxed.
Guards relax.
The source mentions hearing laughter, music, even card games from nearby. Not a high-alert situation on the surface, which just ramps up the tension as these 15 guys slip through the wire undetected.
Into the lion's den. And then, the trigger moment.
Yes, all that careful planning, the stealth, suddenly shattered. According to the source, one commando, Lidi Margano, gets spotted near the MiGs.
By a guard.
By a guard. No time to think, no way to hide. Surprise is gone.
What did he do?
Reacted instantly. Fired his RPG. The source says it hit a jet fighter. Huge explosion lights up the whole area. The guard who spotted him was hit too.
And that was it. The point of no return.
Operation initiated. The 18 minutes of chaos had begun.
Or the source calls it 18 minutes of chaos. Describe that scene based on the account.
Pandemonium. Fireballs from fuel depots erupting, sirens screaming, shouts, panic, explosions ripping across the tarmac, tracer rounds lighting up the sky.
Pure mayhem.
Externally, yes, but here's the key contrast the source makes. Amidst that chaos they created, the fighters hit their marks with chilling accuracy.
How was that possible? Chaos and precision.
The chaos was the smokescreen, disorienting the enemy, overwhelming their response. The precision was the commandos' training, their focus, the result of all those sand model rehearsals. They moved through the storm they unleashed, systematically taking out their targets.
And the targets hit, just to recap from the source.
Jet fuel depots gone. Antonovs and light bombers destroyed. MiGs and helicopters neutralized. Tanks and arms depots hit hard. They weren't just spraying bullets, they were decapitating the Dergue's air power at its source.
And there was another layer to this plan, wasn't there? Something happening outside the base.
Absolutely crucial. The diversion. The source revealed EPLF artillery units positioned in the hills around Asmara opened fire at the same time the commandos struck inside.
Coordinated.
Perfectly synchronized. This wasn't just random shelling. It was designed to sow maximum confusion.
How so?
Enemy commands wouldn't know what was happening. Is it an internal attack? A full ground assault with artillery support? That confusion bought the commandos vital time. And the noise probably helped mask their actions inside the base, at least initially.
A multi-layered, sophisticated plan.
Very much so, combining the surgical strike with a broader strategic deception.
So, while chaos reigns at the base, what's happening in Asmara City itself, according to the source?
People hear the explosions, see the flames lighting up the sky towards the airport. They open their windows, and the source says, quite powerfully, they knew.
They knew what it meant.
They understood. This wasn't an accident. It was the freedom fighters, the Tigadelti, striking back, hitting the regime where it hurt most.
A sign of hope.
A huge morale boost. And the source says they waited through the night, listening for the confirmation on the EPLF radio, the voice of the masses, to announce that the impossible had happened.
Connecting the military action directly to the people's spirit. But the escape. The source makes it clear that wasn't easy.
Definitely not. Getting out of a now fully alerted, probably furious military base after wrecking it, that's incredibly dangerous. The source highlights one specific story, Mehreteab Gebre.
What happened to him?
He was injured during the escape, apparently while cutting through barbed wire. He couldn't keep up.
And faced capture.
Exactly. And knowing what capture likely meant, he made a devastating choice. The source says he refused to be taken alive.
What did he do?
He used his own grenade. The source calls it a hero's farewell.
A final act of defiance.
It's a terribly somber moment, but it underscores the absolute commitment, the stakes these individuals faced. They would rather die by their own hand than fall captive.
There's also that strange detail in the source about Mengistu, the Ethiopian leader.
Yes, framed cautiously as something that is said to have happened. The allegation is that Mengistu ordered Mehreteab's body to be buried with honor.
If true, what would that even mean?
Hard to say for sure. Grudging respect for extreme bravery? A propaganda move? Just a rumor born from the shock of the attack. We don't know. But the fact it's even mentioned suggests the raid. And that sacrifice resonated right at the very top of the enemy command.
So, looking at the results, the source tallies the score, right?
It does. Of the 16 who went in, the 15 commandos plus Commander Isaiah's, 15 came back. One lost Mehreteab Gebre.
And the damage.
33 aircraft confirmed destroyed. Fuel depots incinerated.
What was the immediate military impact?
Crippling, according to the source. The Ethiopian Air Force in Eritrea was effectively grounded for months.
Months? That's huge.
It's a massive strategic blow. No air support, no easy reconnaissance, hampered logistics for their ground troops. It temporarily leveled the playing field, took away the Dergue's biggest weapon in the region, gave the EPLF breathing room and initiative.
And the psychological impact. You mentioned that earlier.
The source emphasizes this heavily. For the Dergue, that myth of invincibility around their air power, the idea that Asmara base was impenetrable, shattered, utterly humiliating.
And for the Eritreans.
An enormous boost. Proof that the enemy could be hit hard even in their strongest fortress. It changed the narrative of the conflict.
And the deception worked. They thought it was a bigger attack.
The source indicates yes. The scale of damage, plus the artillery diversion, led the Dergue to initially believe they'd faced a full invasion, not just a small commando team.
Why was that misperception helpful?
It likely delayed a focused pursuit. If you think you're fighting off a large force, your response is different than hunting a small, escaping unit. The artillery wasn't just noise. It helped sell that larger narrative and gave the 15 commandos a better chance to slip away.
So when you pull back and look at the whole thing based on this source, it's astounding.
33 aircraft, top security base, 18 minutes, a handful of commandos. The sheer disproportionate impact is what makes it legendary.
The source calls it one of the boldest special operations in modern guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
What earns it that title?
I think it's that combination. The extreme difficulty of the target, the enemy's overwhelming advantages, the attacker's minimal resources, the precision execution, the speed, and the devastating result. It just defied all conventional military logic.
And the source gives it a symbolic meaning too, right? Beyond just military targets.
Yeah, it frames it as a strike against oppression itself. By hitting the regime's most potent symbol of power, it wasn't just about breaking plans, it was about breaking the perception of inevitable dominance. It carried huge symbolic weight.
What does the source boil the success down to? What were the key ingredients?
It points to three things: strategy, courage, conviction.
Not superior firepower.
No, it was about smart planning, the bravery to execute it under extreme pressure, and the deep belief driving them. Those are the force multipliers, according to this account.
And that contrast. The enemy thinks it's an army, but the source says it was just a handful of committed men and women.
That really drives home the lesson, doesn't it? Especially in asymmetric conflicts, it's not always about who has more tanks or planes.
What is it about then?
Quality of intelligence, brilliant strategy, meticulous planning, the ability to adapt, and crucially, the skill, determination, and sheer guts of the people executing the plan. This source shows how a small, dedicated, well-prepared force can overcome a seemingly insurmountable power imbalance.
So for you listening, why spend time on this one historical raid through the lens of this specific source?
Because it's such a potent case study, it unpacks everything: intel, planning, tactics, psychology, the human cost, the courage, all intertwined.
It shows how knowledge, planning, and sheer will can achieve what seems impossible.
Exactly. It challenges conventional thinking about power and resistance.
So we've walked through the source's narrative,
Hmm.
the long prep, the SAN model, the unexpected hurdles like Whittier's issue.
The missing scouts, the decision to push on.
Right, into those 18 minutes of precise chaos, the targets destroyed, the diversionary fire.
And then the difficult escape, Mehreteab sacrifice, and the massive impact, both military and psychological. We've really tried to extract the core insights from this one account. And as you reflect on this, think about that tension the source highlights, that incredible blend of months of painstaking, almost obsessive planning, the SAN models, the intel reports, versus those critical moments of pure improvisation and human will.
Like the disguise, or the command to go forward.
Or Mehreteab's final backed. What does that mix tell us about what makes these high-stakes operations succeed against the odds? The source suggests it's not just the plan, however brilliant.
It's the people.
It's the people. Their courage, their adaptability, their conviction, their skill to execute and adapt. That interaction between the blueprint and the human spirit seems to be the deepest takeaway from this account.
A powerful story, powerfully told in the source we explored today. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.